The Michigan State Spartans travel to take on the Nebraska Cornhuskers this Saturday in each team's second Big Ten battle. This game kicks off at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. local time in the Central Time Zone at Nebraska, with the Cornhuskers playing the home team. And both of these teams come off of a bye. And before their bye, they had very revealing losses, with some encouragements and some minor victories woven within those losses, but defeats nonetheless that, combined with their remaining schedule and the outlook of their remaining schedule, I think makes this game sort of a must-win for both of these teams. And before I explain why and why I think this could be the game of the week, and I'm so excited to cover it and make many more videos and plenty more content surrounding these two teams this week and afterwards, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, that you've liked the video, that you've hit the notification bell, and not just the notification bell for the channel, but also for the Michigan State Football and Nebraska Football team playlists that are attached to the video. And if you can't find them attached to the video, because for some people they say that they're actually not attached to the videos when I say they are, though for me it shows that the playlists are attached and you can find them, you can always go on my main channel page, go to the playlist tab, and scroll until you find the Michigan State Football or Nebraska Football playlists. Hit the bell on those and you'll get notified whenever I release a video tagged in those playlists. So whenever I cover the Huskers or the Spartans, you can be notified. So do those things, watch the video all the way through so you can get my full thoughts, and also comment your thoughts down below. I love to hear your comments, and your comments, likes, and watching all the way through, that actually helps support me financially, whether you know it or not. And it also gets me in the YouTube algorithm, which we've had more success with this year than last year. So thank you for your tremendous support. We're going to reach 100,000 subscribers soon, thanks to all of you. Let's get to this video, though, and this matchup. Continuing with how important this game is for Jonathan Smith and Matt Rhule and their coordinators and their assistant staff and these rosters. Both of these teams, in one way or another, were lucky to not come away from their matchups against USC and Michigan more battered than they were. And they were handily defeated on a different level, but with different context as well, than the final score may have indicated. So an example of this is you look at both of these teams' games against Power 4 opponents. For Michigan State, it's Boston College and USC. For Nebraska, it is Cincinnati and Michigan. What did those games look like for both of these teams? Well, Michigan State beat Boston College 42-40 in double overtime at home. Nebraska beat Cincinnati in a close 3-point win, 20-17 in Arrowhead Stadium, in a game that honestly was a de facto home game. And Arrowhead Stadium that night was probably louder than Memorial Stadium will be at any point this year, just because of how it's built. The environment isn't better from a college football standpoint, but Arrowhead is made to trap noise. It's the loudest NFL stadium. It's like the Autzen Stadium of the NFL, if you get the point that I'm trying to make there. You look at USC versus Michigan State. USC won 45-31, and at one point it was 45-24. Michigan State made it a game for about three quarters. At one point it was 31-24 in favor of USC, and Michigan State was able to hold USC to some critical third and fourth downs that the Trojans converted. Had they not, maybe they could have tied it up. There were some encouraging things in that game, but ultimately it was a double-digit loss, and one where they had some players get hurt. Thankfully, it sounds like Wayne Matthews III will be back healthy, and Jordan Hall will no longer be suspended due to targeting. When you look at Nebraska versus Michigan, the Cornhuskers, they lost 30-27 in a game in which Michigan made several boneheaded penalties, in which Nebraska, I would argue, should have dominated the first half, but they had some empty drives. Michigan had some big plays, and at the end of the first half, it felt like Nebraska dominated the first quarter, but Michigan physically dominated Nebraska in the first half. And had that first quarter maybe gone differently, maybe the game goes differently. But really, after that first quarter, it was a matter of how much could Michigan mess up to keep Nebraska in the game. Really, when I look back on it. There are a lot of reruns of that game where Michigan wins by 2 or 3 scores, and the game's over by the fourth quarter. That didn't happen there. And again, much like Michigan State USC, there are encouraging things for Nebraska to take away from. But they also had a lot of glaring weaknesses in that game. Same with Michigan State. Michigan State's pass defense is pretty much non-existent. And it's the same thing with Nebraska's run defense. Nebraska's outside of the top 100 in opponent yards allowed per carry. Now, Michigan is first nationally in yards per carry, and Cincinnati is very high up there. And Cincinnati's offense right now is very high flying. They're favored over undefeated Iowa State. So it's not like these teams are scrubs, but they do have some critical weaknesses here. Nebraska is a heavy favorite, 11.5 points. This is probably the latest in any video I've discussed the spread, but I wanted to get out of the way the importance of this game and some backdrop behind these teams, because it's been a minute since they've played. They were both on a bye, and both staffs, I think, have been circling this game during the bye, and it's very important. This is so important because Maryland is better than I think most thought they were going to be. There's a chance after this weekend Maryland is undefeated when they host Nebraska. You need to enter that game if you're Nebraska with momentum. For Michigan State, you have UCLA after this game, but after that you have a trip to Indiana, and then I think you host Michigan, or maybe I'm forgetting a game in between those. But both of these schedules, while Nebraska's looks more advantageous, Nebraska's going to be favored in more games, they both have their challenges that I think require a win here. And if you lose here, then you have to find some wins elsewhere on your schedule, which will be tough. Michigan State is the 63rd best team per FPI at a 1.9 rating. Not good, but the average FBS team, a little bit above that. Nebraska's at a 14.1, which is 21st in the power ratings. I think both of these quarterbacks and receivers are X-factor groups. And then on defense, I love Michigan State's linebackers. I love Nebraska's defensive backs, at least from what I can tell on both of those defensive units through 4 games in the year. But maybe we'll learn something different, because I think the defenses for both of these teams are the weaker side of the ball. I do believe that. And we'll get more into that throughout the video, because while it's obvious, painfully obvious, that Michigan State's defense is a weakness, analytically you can pretty easily convince yourself that Nebraska has a good defense. And while I think there are parts of the defense that are good, and I don't think it's quite as bad as Michigan State's, I think that there are some misleading analytic pieces about the Cornhusker defense. It is definitely not as good as last year's unit or the unit before that. And in ESPN's efficiency, you could be convinced that it's close. And I don't think it is. Nonetheless, Nebraska has a 0.219 points per play margin. Michigan State's is just a 0.025. So the Cornhuskers, I would say, are the superior team. We'll get into it a little bit more about why they're the more talented team. I do think that they are the deeper team, but this is going to be a hard game for both the Spartans and the Cornhuskers. And I think a big part of the reason why is, look, Nebraska's the better team. They're better than a lot of teams nationally. I think that they are a top 25, top 30 team. They're an above average Power 4 team, average at the absolute worst. Michigan State is probably to this point a below average Power 4 team, and average Power 4 team at the best, based on what I can see. But there are some matchup edges that do go Michigan State's way. Michigan State in this game has to answer their questions about their pass defense with some sort of positivity. Otherwise, Dylan Raiola and Nyziah Hunter and Luke Lindenmeyer and Dane Key and even Emmett Johnson out of the backfield are going to tear this unit to shreds. I mean, Dane Key this year, he already has 226 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. Nyziah Hunter's approaching 200 receiving yards. Dylan Raiola, true sophomore 5-star quarterback on the season, he has over 1,000 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, 1 interception, and is completing 75.6% of his passes. He's truly taken several steps forward under offensive coordinator Dana Holgorsen. His offensive line, I am disappointed by this unit. I thought genuinely that this unit was going to be a good, great offensive line. I don't see how it's different from last year's unit through 4 games. I don't. Where last year's unit couldn't really run block all that well. In pass blocking, it was above average. This unit may actually be worse in pass blocking after that Michigan game, but we're only 4 games in, so I don't want to make a definitive statement. But there are issues with this offensive line, and Michigan having one of the better front sixes in all of college football, one of the best defensive lines, of course, is going to expose that. Michigan State does not have that talent, but Michigan State is more talented than Houston Christian. They're more talented than Akron. They're probably pretty close to a Cincinnati caliber team, and Cincinnati gave Nebraska issues. They did, and they did not have the quarterback or wide receivers that Michigan State did, though their DBs are better. When you look at Michigan State, Aidan Chiles is playing at a very high level. He has 9 touchdowns to 1 interception. He's completing 69% of his throws and has 868 yards. He has also 154 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. And in that USC game, I was very impressed with his pocket awareness. He didn't showcase much of that in week 1, week 2, but in week 3, and it was an FCS opponent, he looked better in the pocket, more comfortable, more aware. And in week 4, he really took a step forward in that regard. Their main receivers, Nick Marsh, Omari Kelly, Cre'Shawn McCray, they all at this point have, outside of McCray, over 200 receiving yards. McCray is 128, and Omari Kelly has 317. Marsh, over the bye week, I imagine, has healed up a little bit after he suffered an injury, I think against Youngstown State, that was threatening to sideline him against USC. Michigan State's offensive line is pretty good at run blocking, but their pass blocking is definitely questionable for sure. And then defensively, the weakest side of each of these units here. Nebraska, I like their corners and their DBs overall. So that's Andrew Marshall and Sear Wright are the corners. And Nebraska has performed pretty well in pass defense. And they have some players like Dasan McCullough, Marquise Watson-Trent, Javen Wright at linebacker, who I think they're fast, they're athletic. They could use a little bit more size there, but McCullough's big, McCullough's athletic. He's probably their highest ceiling player in the linebacker room, and Sear Wright's a future NFL corner. For Michigan State, the Spartans this year, they have, it's very similar to last year's unit, except I feel like with the departure of Charles Brantley, they're actually worse at stopping the pass. In terms of run defense, I feel like they're similar. It's a okay, maybe above average run defense, but when you can't get pressure on the quarterback, it's pretty easy to pass to open up the run, and since you're not very deep, people can wear you down. So both of these defenses I am so much less certain about than I am both of the offenses here. I think quarterback play, in terms of who plays just a little bit better than the other, is going to potentially determine this game. Pass protection is something that is going to be very key to pay attention to. Keep your eyes peeled open for who allows more pressures and who allows the first sack in this game. And I say that because neither pass blocking unit is fantastic. Nebraska's offensive line as a whole, I think, has major issues in run blocking and pass blocking. Michigan State has a good run blocking O-line, but that pass protection looked beyond abysmal in the first, 2-3 weeks. And then against USC, Michigan State showed a lot of impressive things against USC in the same way that I was impressed with the fact that Raiola just kept taking sack after sack after sack, and yet made some NFL-worthy throws. And as the game went on, and as he got comfortable, I think made some good decisions, gave his players chances. I don't know. I think that there were encouraging things from those losses, but because they were losses, that makes this game that much more important. Rushing offense is going to be very important here. Both of these teams have at least one, if not multiple, future NFL receivers. And by NFL, I don't mean first round. That would be generational, or in the case of Jeremiah Smith, once in a century type player. NFL just means you could get picked in the draft. Both of these teams probably have multiple NFL draft picks at the receiver position. Unlike Michigan, probably unlike Cincinnati, you get the point. And Aidan Chiles and Dylan Raiola, based on how they've produced and how they've played this year, I think will be picked in the NFL at some point. The difference between these teams, I think, can really boil down to backfield play on defense, so the linebackers and secondary, and the rushing offenses. I think that both of these run defenses are suspect enough to where it's going to come down to your defensive backs compensating a little bit for the fronts in run defense. This is especially the case with Nebraska, but even with Michigan State, I could see this being necessary. And then it's important that these offensive lines are physical, that they block well, they get off their double blocks and get to the second level, and that the running backs are able to find lanes and hit the hole when appropriate. I would say that Michigan's offensive line, or Michigan State's offensive line, is better at run blocking than Nebraska's, but I think Nebraska's running back, one in Emmett Johnson, is by far the best running back on the field. By far. And that's even including Michigan State's running back, Frazier, Mekhi Frazier, who I think is really good, by the way. But Emmett Johnson is a different player entirely. Unless they both play at a similar level this Saturday, I'm just going to give Emmett Johnson benefit of the doubt based on what I saw from him last year, the year before that, and also this year so far, where there were some runs against Michigan where, if not for his elusiveness and his vision and his quick-footedness, he could have been tackled in the backfield, and instead he found a way to get a few extra yards. I was impressed with his play against the Michigan Wolverines. A few more things before I get to my prediction in this matchup here. This is the game of the week, in my opinion, very close to it. Alabama, Vanderbilt, of course, ranked matchup. Nationally, probably has different stakes. Of course, when you look at, some other games that could be close, Cincinnati and Iowa State, or maybe you're even looking at the Big Ten, Illinois, Purdue, Penn State, UCLA, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Ohio State. Not because those games will be close, Illinois, Purdue can, but because they feature a ranked team that at least has a Big Ten win or will have Big Ten wins, Penn State. Those games could be used to assess how close to national title or college football playoff contention some of those games are, but this is very evenly matched, and I think both of these staffs are great, and both of these programs have more to offer than what they've shown us in recent memory. So this is a very important, critical game here. I believe that Michigan State is going to have opportunities against this Nebraska secondary. Nebraska's secondary is a good unit, but I think analytically it's a bit overvalued. Cincinnati had a ton of transfer wide receivers and really just an above average offensive line with a quarterback in Sorsby who does not have Raiola's ceiling. In week one, in that environment, it was always going to be tough to build chemistry with your wide receivers in game one. It was always going to be tough to do. And then with Michigan's receivers, so I noticed this with Donovan McCulley and Samaj Morgan. They were at times the fastest player on the field, including Nebraska's defense, which is scary because I don't think Michigan's receivers are all that good. Michigan State's receivers are way ahead of Michigan's. And yet Michigan's receivers at times were getting open. Were beating their man. But they have balloon hands. Like they can't catch the ball to save their life. Underwood, as of last week, wasn't updated for last weekend, but before last weekend, was second in the nation in dropped passes. Michigan State's receivers are better than that. They're more athletic. Nick Marsh would be wide receiver 1 for Michigan. I would venture he'd be wide receiver 1 for Nebraska as well. I think that when you look at Nebraska's defense, right now it's 34th in adjusted expected points added per play. Right now, it's only allowing 3.3 yards per dropback against Michigan's passing offense, Cincinnati's passing offense, a bad Akron team, and Houston Christian. This Michigan State passing offense, for a variety of reasons, is going to be far ahead of any of those 4 when they play. So I think Michigan State will have some success through the air. And what will help their success through the air is that Nebraska's allowing a 48.4% rushing success rate and allowing opponents to average 6.1 yards per carry on them. 6.1. And Nebraska only generates a 10.9% havoc rate defensively, while Michigan State's offense, they're not super impressive. I think they might be a bit underrated analytically. They're allowing a 13.1% havoc rate. They're inconsistent offensively. They allow TFLs, sacks. They sometimes make turnovers that are just completely boneheaded. Nebraska isn't exactly a defense that feasts on those opportunities, such as, say, I want to say, when you look at a defense like USC's, for example. USC's defense is, their hope is making havoc plays, for example. That's all they have at this point, as long as they're as injured as they were against Illinois. Nebraska offensively is okay at running the ball. They're averaging 8.7 yards per drop back. I just think that while they'll be able to pass the ball rather effectively, coming off of a bye, I do like Michigan State's staff more, and I believe in their rushing offense over Nebraska's rushing offense, and I believe in their run defense over Nebraska's run defense. I hate this pick. It doesn't make sense because Nebraska is the better team, but I think Michigan State's live here. I think that Smith is a better coach, and I don't have the exact numbers pulled up, but you can go back in Jonathan Smith's history and Matt Rhule's. Smith is a little bit better off the bye. Just a little bit better. And while I think Nebraska is the better team, I cannot ignore that I have seen out of Nebraska Big 12, truly Big 12 level trench play. I mean, look at Cincinnati. Cincinnati beat them in the trenches. And at the end of the game, they beat them quite convincingly. That's Big 12 trench play. So your supporting cast and your skill position players and your secondary can do some things there. And I think Nebraska will beat someone, if not someone's, of note. They're not going to lose in blowouts with the quarterback they have, with the skill position players they have, with the staff they have. They could beat USC. They could beat Michigan State. They could beat Minnesota. I mean, they should beat Minnesota based on the Minnesota that I've seen. They can beat Iowa. They can, I mean, with how Penn State's played, there's maybe a world where they could beat Penn State, although with how bad the Cornhusker rushing defense is, Penn State should still be able to run the ball pretty effectively there. I just think that coming off of the bye, there's a chance both of these teams can be slow, and I think Nebraska has a better chance of being slow off the bye than Michigan State does here. That doesn't match up well with how these teams are built. Michigan State is better built to run the ball and to stop the run, and their passing attack is, in my mind, about as effective when watching both of these teams compete. Nebraska's, I think, is a bit deeper. I think Raiola is a passer with a higher floor than Chiles and maybe a higher ceiling, but I do like Michigan State to cover here anyway. And looking at how the rushing attack and trench play matches up, I do think Michigan State will better be able to control the game and get more sustainable possessions that don't have quite the same margin of error. I think Nebraska will win through the air, just a little bit though, not by as much as they beat Michigan, and they will lose on the ground. Michigan State will control that side. Can Nebraska win? Absolutely. I even think Nebraska should be favored, but this is a tough spot. And preseason, I said that Nebraska would split the Michigan and Michigan State games. Upon looking at these teams through 4 games and college football through 4 games, Nebraska's trenches are underwhelming even by my expectations. And I did not think the D-line or even the defensive front overall would be good. Offensive lines very much disappointed me. For Michigan State, they're kind of who I thought they were going to be, if I'm being honest. Maybe a little bit worse, but not as disappointing relative to my expectations as Nebraska. So I'm picking Michigan State to win, and I'm picking them to cover here. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys very soon. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit the notification bell, and tell me why I'm wrong in the comment section.